Um, First of all, yeah, thanks for coming. I'd like to just, before I start, introduce the people, or acknowledge the people that are on this ARC project with me, and obviously David, the lead investigator, will speak later, but we also have two other fabulous project investigators in the room, Dale Yurung and Devaki Monanai, who are both CDU people, but the project is fairly national, as David will explain. It's spanning a lot of regions of Australia. I'd like to, my name's Andrew Taylor, by the way. I work at the Northern Institute and I'm a demographer. So I'd like to acknowledge the Larrakia people. The Larrakia Nation is the traditional owners of the place that we are having this seminar on, and acknowledge them as First Nations and traditional owners of the lands on which we work, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. So today, I might turn it on. Yeah, so today's talk is an overview of a project that's really just started. It's an Australian Research Council funded project. And we'll show you the details of that in a minute. That we are, just starting, but we've got enough sort of detail behind it to give some insights on where we think it might go. So that's what today is about. So what I'm going to do now is introduce my wonderful colleague, David Radford. David is an Associate Professor of Sociology at the School of Society and Culture. It's still called that? Yep. At Adelaide University, the newly formed Adelaide University, which was a merger of the two. His research investigates migration, diversity, and interculturality in rural and regional and urban Australia, emphasising the importance of the micro, everyday lived experiences of migration, which is very much what this whole of community approach to migration in rural and regional Australia is about. So, yeah, David, welcome.
It's terrific to be able to just share a little bit about the project with you all. And Andrew, we're going to tag team. Andrew is going to follow up a little bit on some of that work. It's called Investigating Whole of Community Approaches to Regional Attraction, Settlement, Migrant Attraction, Settlement, and Retention. One of the things that is very clear across Australia with regional, rural and regional areas is the challenge around ongoing viability of some of these communities. Smaller and larger. There's a number of factors affecting the kinds of challenges that rural and regional areas are facing. It's not just about attracting migrants into these communities, and it's not just about settlement. But the kind of core question that keeps coming up in a lot of the work that I've been doing, my colleagues have been doing, and I'll talk a little bit about some of our other colleagues, is around retention. It's how do people, when they move into regional areas, what are the likelihood of them staying? And what are the things that we can learn about what's already happening across regional Australia that can help us, both in terms of the challenges, but also the opportunities that are there. And of course, when we talk about migration, the project is not just focusing on one area of migration. We know that there are migrants across a whole range of different categories. Skilled migration, temporary, holiday makers, increasingly seasonal workers, and of course international students and refugee or humanitarian background migrants. My own particular focus has been around humanitarian settlement in rural and regional areas and some of those challenges and opportunities that are there. I started off by looking at one particular town in South Australia, about 8,000 people. Within a 3-5 year period, over 400 Afghans moved into this town, not through any kind of planned approach from the government. There were a couple of areas, particularly Mount Gambier, that was the focus of that kind of planned settlement, but kind of organically, migrants were moving in to this particular country town, and it brought challenges. You know, when it's rapid migrant growth from culturally diverse communities, it challenges the status quo that was taking place. And I was interested in the ways, the experiences of refugee background migrants, but also rural communities, because it challenges their own sense of self-identity. Who are we as a community, and how are we going to respond? And as you can well imagine, there were responses across the spectrum. Overall positive, but there were challenges associated with that. So, I mean, that kind of began my own journey in looking at rural and regional communities and the importance of them. And I think one of the other things that stands out about rural and regional areas is the fact that those from the bigger metropolitan areas often think of a kind of white, homogeneous kind of communities that are associated with rural and regional areas. And we know that that's far from the case. I think Darwin is a good case in point of a large kind of city in a regional area, and it's so diverse. And if we go down in terms of towns and cities with from anywhere from 3,000 up until larger communities, we see what some have called the global countryside. In this little town that I was talking about with these Afghans, suddenly had Chinese background, Filipino background, had long-standing Maori community that were making up this town. One of the challenges around retention is Graham Hugo claimed, he's passed away a few years ago, one of the foremost migration scholars in Australia, that if you want to attract regional migrants, you need jobs, employment. But if they're going to stay, you need belonging. Without belonging, people will not see a sense of home, and if they don't feel a sense of home, they're unlikely to stay. And so the project that we are looking at is really, we've called a whole of community approach, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Some of those challenges for not just attraction but retention are quite well known. Employment, if you don't have jobs, people aren't going to come. Available housing, available and affordable. Are there migrant support services? Are there access to health services? Education. Of course, that becomes really important as children get older, but that becomes really important. Also, the degree of volunteering and welcoming communities. The city of Darwin is part of what's called the Welcoming City Network in Australia, which is setting itself up to be one of these cities that actually deliberately and intentionally goes about creating a welcoming environment. It's key for migrants who want to stay and feel a part. And of course, issues of racism and otherness and ethnic minority challenges are a huge issue. In one of this particular country town I was in, I tried to meet people from different parts of the community, and one of them came up to, I got to go to an event that was all, I would say, an all-white event, mostly people from a farming background, a big sports club that had success. I had 3 very prominent Australian athletes, sports people that were there. I kind of sat down as what we call participant observation, being a part of the community. And this farmer came up, sat down next to me, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I was obviously the stranger. And I was telling him I'm investigating migration, particularly these kind of Afghans that have moved into your town. "Oh," he said, "I'm a racist." First words out of his mouth, "I'm a racist. I can't wait to get these beep, beep, beep out of town." And the more he drank, the more colorful the language became. So clearly, those are issues that are there. And I think we're certainly not thinking that there's this kind of rosy picture about regional migration, but there are a lot more positive stories than people are aware of, and we really want to learn from them. We know that international migration plays a major role in some of this out-migration that's taking place across regional Australia. Young people are leaving, a lot of communities are aging, and there's a kind of depopulation taking place. At the same time, we're having increasing migration to Australia. We know this is a big topical issue at the moment. But it's a big issue, and part of that, in the past, there have been government policies about encouraging migrants to move out of the big cities, metropolitan cities in the east, into some of the more regional areas. But I think one of the things we recognize that there's a gap between understanding the kind of challenges in these communities and how best can we see and support regional communities, both in that attraction settlement, but also in the retention. And so this project seeks to do that. We recognize it's a two-way process. It's about migrants and their experiences and rural communities. A lot of research has really focused on the migrant experience, which is still essential very much to our project. But there's been less work done on the role of regional and rural communities and the steps and ways in which they can be engaged in that process. And we want to bring both of those together. We use the term whole of community partly because in the research we were doing, it's a nice catchphrase that stakeholders across government and others throw the word out. We need a whole of community approach, but actually what does it mean? There's very limited work on trying to actually kind of operationalize that term, and we've sought to do that here. Out of some of the work, there's some keys to the approach that we see as really important. The role of community leadership. The real focus on the project is working closely with local government councils and, where possible, state governments. And this project, as you'll see a bit later, we have 6 locations across Northern Territory, South Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales. We have the local government council in each location as a partner in this project. In fact, I would say they are actually key because they're the ones on the grassroots who are actually working out the challenges associated with migration. So we're excited that we have each local government council, both the Northern Territory government and South Australian government, different departments are part of that. I'll touch on that a little bit. But leadership creates the environment that they bring at those levels that either facilitates a positive environment for migrants to settle or not. In this particular country town I've worked in, they had a mayor who was phenomenal. The leadership they gave to the council and the community provided the context in which, despite the major changes that were taking place, actually facilitated a growing welcome. And because of that, by word of mouth, other migrants were coming to this town because of the experience was mostly positive. There's been a change in local government elections, and that mayor is no longer the mayor, and somebody else who is less positive is now in that role. And members of the community have said it's changed the environment in which we have as a town, and perhaps not as positive as it was before. So leadership is key, engaging the broader community, not just migrants, but actually finding ways that migrants become a part of the whole community. And there's a tendency to silo migrants or refugees, and the whole of community says, well, no, we need to find ways to engage everybody through meaningful relationships and a sense of broader identity. In the whole of community approach, we include the experiences and perspectives of local government, community stakeholders. We're going to be looking at employers and business as key in this process. One of the things that we're looking at, one of the towns we're going to be focused in is a abattoir in the town of 3,000 people that employs over 500 employees from 36 nationalities in a town of 3,000. That's changing diversity in a regional town. But what was interesting about this business, and we're really keen to explore it, not just in this town, but elsewhere, is the business has an 80% retention goal. They want their employees to stay in the long term. And part of that was not only in the kind of policies and processes they have within their business, but how they can encourage their employees to be a part of the regional community. And so it's linking the business into the community and the employees into the community. In this particular case, a whole group of Pacific Islanders have been a part of the CFS, the Country Fire Service, where the numbers were dwindling and suddenly they had these influx of migrants who are part of a key aspect of their community. Sports, and another key stakeholder for us is Aboriginal communities. There's a huge gap in understanding of the role and experiences of Aboriginal communities in terms of international migration. And we're really hoping in each of our locations to work closely with the native title holders in each particular community, and we have an Aboriginal colleague who is really leading that part of the research as a really key element. Part of this project is quite broad and multidisciplinary. So we have, we'll talk a little bit, we have 8 colleagues across 4 universities with a very strong qualitative and quantitative aspect to the project. We have kind of 5 areas around some of the work we've done that we look at with a whole of community approach. One is around locality, the role of local government and community leadership, and exploring the importance of that in each regional area. Discourse, what are the narratives taking place within local communities about migration? And where are those narratives coming from? From the media, from personal experience, from public opinion. One of the things I've learned very early on in regional communities, it's a small community, relatively. Facebook is an interesting place where discourses go on. And because of the relationship I had built up, I remember one of my visits, I turned up and one of the people that I got to know quite well in the community said, "David, did you know what happened?" I said, "What do you mean what happened?" "It was on Facebook." "What do you mean it was on Facebook?" An event had taken place in a barber shop. It happened to not be very positive, but the barber put it up on Facebook. And guess what? In the community, everybody is everybody's Facebook friend. Discourses and stories, whether misinformed or informed, get spread very quickly, and they become really important. At the same time, some communities have very strong histories of migration and are very keen to showcase we actually have a story of migration going back decades and decades and decades. And we have an experience of migrants, largely positive, coming into our regional areas, and that is a story that we also want to be able to tell. Relations, building community through meaningful relationships. We know that there are also structural factors at work, and social networks, particular programs and events that regional communities are engaging in, not just focused on migrants, but on the whole of community and bringing everybody together. One of the things that one of these rural communities, when I was doing work in New South Wales, said, you know Harmony Day and Refugee Week, they're good events, but who goes to them? Mostly those who are really supportive of those communities or those people from those communities. We don't get a lot of people from the broader community. What can we do to bring everybody together? And they ended up starting something called the Chill and Grill event, which was in the park, a picnic. They brought everybody together across the groups, and that apparently had been very effective in not siloing migrants, but seeing them all come together. We have 3 broad research questions that we want to look at: regional migrant mobility dynamics, the trends and patterns across time. And Andrew will talk a little bit about this and how we can understand what is actually happening in Darwin. What's the history of migration? Who is coming in, who's going out, and why? What can we learn from that? How do regional communities navigate the opportunities and challenges that are taking place? And based on the comparative analysis that we have across Australia, how can a whole of community approach be tailored to support the settlement integration needs of particular communities? As I said, this is a very strong qualitative and quantitative project. I'm a qualitative researcher. I like interviewing people and their experiences. But can be a tendency to actually kind of focus on qualitative or quantitative research. And this research is very deliberately what I call a balanced 50-50 approach, where we see we need the data, the statistics, the information that help us understand, and we need the lived experience of that. And this project will cover both of those. We have 6 towns. The focus is South Australia and Northern Territory. One reason is that it's less researched compared to the Eastern Seaboard. A lot more work has been done there. But we do have, so in South Australia, we have Murray Bridge just outside of Adelaide, which is a rapidly growing regional centre, border town on the Victorian South Australian border. Alice Springs and Darwin. One of the things I learned in Alice Springs, my visit with meeting with the town council, was the long-standing Filipino community that had been living for years and years in Alice. I had no idea that that was the case. And then Mildura in Victoria, and a little town called Leeton in New South Wales. And this is a 4-year project, so we see the benefit of not just going in for a couple of weeks and going out, but engaging with community over 3 or 4 years. We're able to see some of these changes over time. Our partners, as I said, include all the local government councils, 3 major migrant support organisations that in Darwin and Melaleuca, in Alice Springs, and also in South Australia, and state and territory government departments. I'm just very excited about the role and partnership we can have with state governments in this, because they also are keen about the development of their particular states and regions. And I will say it's not just the economic. When we talked with the Department of Primary Industries and Regions, I said, well, we see the importance of economic growth, but it's not just economic. It's the social, cultural, and economic approach in understanding what's taking place that is really key to what's happening. And hopefully we can inform policy and programs and initiatives. And we also have Welcoming Australia, which is a national body very keen on these approaches. I just need to turn over to Andrew in a minute, but I just want to say that there are a number of real benefits that we see to the project. We are able to develop and implement evidence-based processes, evidence-based, the opportunity for academics to work with community stakeholders to provide the kind of evidence they need to know what's happening in their communities and how they can better support those. Rich analytical data, which Andrew will talk on, and working closely with our partner organizations at the important needs that they see for their own communities. I just want to briefly say that this town, which we did a pilot project and which continues to be a part of our project, called Leeton, they have a big sign as you drive into their town and as you leave, and then one in the middle. They've made a very clear statement. We are a town that welcomes refugees, migrants, and new settlers. And they have instituted policies inside their strategic plan. They have specific policies that they are measured and accountable for in order to support this process. The mayor said we had to get the community to accept that what we were doing with the sign, that they needed to be a part of it. It's not just about the mayor and the council. It needed to be the whole town and community. And just to say, the kinds of ways in which communities and partners benefit, we had a public report. They took this report and they used it to implement a whole range of help aligning their programs. They used it for advocacy across a whole range of different areas. And they also used it as a huge multiplier. They actually won several $100,000 worth of grants across some of these programs. And they used what they call their little green book, the research that we had done to show to these funding bodies, this is what we are doing as a community. We need you to support that in even greater ways. So I'll just hand it over to Andrew now.
Thank you so much, David. Right. So now you have an overview of the project and who's involved. I'm going to talk a bit about the exciting new data-based ideas we have around this project. So normally as academics, we might get somewhere between a week and a month to do our data crunching on a project and report on it and analyse it. But when you have a multi-year grant, it's a beautiful opportunity to do exciting new data exploration. So we've had time already to sit back and think about what some of those might be and how, as David said, this can contribute across the domains and the dimensions of the project, qualitative and quantitative, as they inform each other through the research process. So some of you will know a little bit about some of this stuff, but you may not too. So I'll just go briefly through what the plan is at the moment. So you may not know, but well, going back in time, we once had a push to get an Australia card, right? That fell flat on its face, was voted down very much unanimously by the country. But as of now, there is a nice big data set that people like I can access that has all your interactions with Australian government departments on it, and it's called the Person Level Integrated Data Asset. I think they need to change the name. Not very nice, but there you go. So it has tax, social, what's it called? Human services, home affairs, etc., education, immunisation register. So every time you interact, something goes up against your record. They don't keep names for obvious reasons, and they have very, very, very strict confidentiality around it. To access this data, you actually have to go through a accreditation course, and then even then to actually log into the system, there's a 4-page manual that I can't understand. So it's very well protected. Thankfully, I've got SIGID. Anyway, so this data set has pretty much the whole Australian population on it. So what could we do with this? Well, one of the things we could do, and I've always wanted to do, is to use it to construct what I call itineraries. So this is just geographically and spatially mapping out where people have been in their life on that basis. And of course, looking at that and thinking about the patterns of people, the patterns of specific types of people. Where do people that tend to come to Darwin, who are Filipino and have come from somewhere else in Australia, what's the strength of relationship to each other local government in Australia? So construct these itineraries to answer some of those sorts of questions. And yeah, look at the relationships between probably local government areas and others. And I forgot to, and I want to acknowledge George Tan, our former colleague here at CDU, and I are kind of responsible, I suppose, for the quantitative work on this project. So hi, George, if you're online. Yeah, clusters, nodes, hubs, spokes. What are they? Where are they? For migrants in particular, and then we can drill down to specific characteristics. Do female migrants tend to congregate somewhere as opposed to males? You know, all these sorts of questions. Gender, employment, income, and so on. So yes, and then the visualising is the exciting bit, I think, which would obviously come at the end of the analysis, because I think this is something we can present to people like councils and other partners, where they get a clear picture of the strength of flows to and from their place, their community, to and with other communities nearby and or even far away, including other countries. So we might end up doing a plot for each of them, such as this, a migration plot, which shows you that exact thing. And so if you are, this is country-based, just an example, not one I did. So this is the US. Who's coming to the US? Lots of people from India. See, it's a thick line. Who's leaving the US? For sort of minimal flows to Spain, Italy, and Germany, that sort of thing. So imagine this for local governments. It's quite a powerful visualization to underlay or overlay probably a lot of what they already know, but it gives you that statistical baseline that they may not have had previously. So, and then another visualization technique that we might use, hopefully we'll use, is really sorting out these relationships with other places for migrants, as in, where have you been before? Where are you likely to go next if you are a migrant of this nationality or this occupation, if you like? So these are the things we'll have to sort out. But obviously, we'll create an initial baseline picture. So social network analysis, I think, will be a good one to visualize what we do with the data. And it's a technique, yeah, to look at connections, and we'll look at LGAs initially, I think, to and from individual LGAs, We can measure and quantify the strength of relationships and the importance of individual local government areas within networks. We can look across networks. So, for example, if we pretend this is the NT, the smaller, the one with the pink dots, if this is every LGA in the NT, how does it interact? How does English please, Andrew. How does each LGA within the NT relate to each other LGA, and how do they relate to, say, LGAs in South Australia? We can get to that sort of level of detail and talk about the strength of the network, the didactic relationships, and where there's two strong LGA flows between, there's strong flows between two LGAs or three LGAs. They call that triadic relationships. And then just speak about the overall network. So we'll be able to compare and contrast these across Australia. So I think that's exciting. It's a big process, but certainly something that you get the space to do in a 4-year project. And another big part of this, of our intentions for this project, is to do a whole of community migration survey. So again, building on what David talked about, we want to learn about migrant experiences, overseas born, in rural and regional Australia, and remote Australia for that matter. But also we want to hear from the community through the survey. So although there'll be, a lot of quantitative questions, we do want to measure the whole community domains, such as economic participation, sense of belonging, social belonging, access to services. Housing is definitely coming up in every conversation we have at the moment, and livability, attraction, retention, and those. So we've had a first go at a module within the survey that you might loosely call a whole of community module, the sorts of questions you'd probably ask people on a Likert scale, on a scale of 1 to 5, how strongly do you agree or disagree with these statements? So these are not finalised, this is just to give you a feel for the sorts of questions we're thinking about at the moment. And from these, we can develop indexes of several types. Got to love a good index, such as a rural, and I made these up, rural index of migrant belonging and settlement, index of attraction and retention, and so on. There's unlimited indexes you could build. But just to give you a feel of the sorts of directions that we're thinking about taking the project in a quantitative sense. But wait, there's more. Of course, we've got the 2026 census coming up. Very important that we all complete our form. Pretty much every decision that's made across the board, private sector, government sector, all levels of government, and by businesses, is somehow relates to census data. So I do encourage you on the 11th of August to fully complete your form. But this is the data source that will give us a baseline of who is where, and from which we can link. There is a linking data set that links the census with the Home Affairs Settlement database, it's called. So we can really dig deep into visa types there and speak about, okay, so we've got a lot of Afghans in, which town is that? In the abattoir? Is it? Oh, a border town. Let's say we've got a lot of Afghans in border town. We want to find out, what types of visas are common amongst that community, which is important to speak about, their sense of belonging. If particular types of visas have particular connotations in terms of where you might be in 2 years or 5 years' time. And we can speak about these sorts of things through that data. That's all. So these are very large, I would describe these as large examinations of large data sets, and we can cover the whole of Australia. But David pointed out that there are a number of selected sites in Australia, was it 7? 6, sorry, that we really will focus on. So we'll try and, for example, get a higher response rate or an overrepresentation in the survey in those sites, so that we can have some meaningful data and do some meaningful statistical analysis on that data. So I'd like to just sum up the project. It's really wonderful to be part of this project with a great bunch of people. We're operationalising the WOC, whole of community approach, multi-university, multi-partnered, and that's really the beauty of it. There's some great minds in the project, present company accepted. We're focusing on the case study sites, but it really is a whole of regional Australia approach, particularly in the quantitative phase, I think. And it's going to be very important to guiding governments at all levels on what it really means for this big change in regional and rural Australia, what it means for migrants and what it means for communities, and how we can foster tolerance and growth and all the rest that local governments and others are looking for, livability and so on. And I was going to finish just on a note for the academics amongst us who might be thinking about or who have applied for ARCs. It's a very Australian Research Council grants. This one's called a linkage. It's a very long process. It's very tough, and it's very tough to get one. So we got knocked back the first time, but even though we had really good feedback from the people that reviewed it. So we're disappointed, but we knew we had a good application. So we went again, and lo and behold, we got it. So I'm just encouraging people, researchers not to give up on that process. And hopefully, the stuff we've talked about gives you a feel for what you can do when you're given the time and space through these projects to do so. We are looking to speak with people who might want to get involved with the project still. Hope I'm not speaking out of turn. In whatever way you think you might like to. So we're very open to discussions, with community groups or organisations or even government who might want to get involved. So I will leave it at that. Thank you again for coming, and I think we're going to have some time for questions, are we? Yes. Oh, yes, okay. So four universities you see across the top are involved. Adelaide University, Charles Sturt, La Trobe, and Charles Darwin University, of course. So yeah, there we are. Are there questions? Where do we go first, Kevin? In the room? Any questions in the room or comments? Yeah, hi. Sorry.
Hi, my name is. It's my favorite toy.
Yeah.
I teach in this class,
Don't
and
throw
I'm
it at me.
like, my name is Bhanu. I'm an economist, and I'm really interested in the social network analysis part. I'm a network analyst, and I did my PhD on network analysis. And I find it fascinating. It's and there's been so little uptake of it that sometimes it's a bit disappointing that, wow, we're not using more of it, right? But coming back to your slide, like I get the first part where you were talking about, in the previous slide where you were talking about migrants going from different countries and that sort of thing. But in the second part, when you come to this, the next slide where you start talking about this one, how are you collecting the data for that? I'm sorry, I'm just a bit lost.
Yes, so this will go back to, this will be pleader data.
Okay.
Where I don't think the address is available there, but certainly I think SA1, or you can code it up to, sorry, these are the ABS geographical units.
Yeah.
You can code it up to, pretty much any, you can use correspondence tables and code it up to any geography you want. So suburb, LGA, and whatever, country, so that will be the source of that data, yeah.
That's very exciting. I didn't realize it existed. Yeah.
And there's another data set, you can do that from that I didn't talk about, and that's the Australian census longitudinal data. It's a 5% sample from the census, and that has place of usual residence for each census time, which is every 5 years, since I think 2001. It might be 2006, remember? So again, we'll capture bad term again. We'll look at people who've interacted those towns, the regional towns and communities through that data source. Yeah. You know, and you can answer questions like, who has ever lived in Darwin in the last 20 years? Because the census only captures point in time and 1 year ago and 5 years ago, where a lot of issues with the 1 and 5 year old data because people forget and you miss all the moves in between. So the PLEDA data, although I haven't seen it yet, presumably, fingers crossed, will allow not real time, but will cover all people, all moves by people in intercensual periods as well as census time. Yeah, and so that will be the basis. You want to do another PhD?
We're constantly doing one with our research projects, aren't we?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I'd definitely be in touch. Yeah, that'd be great. Anyone else want the cube?
Can I just say, you know, as an academic, it's so exciting as a qualitative researcher that's interested in the lived experience to actually work closely with colleagues who can go into this kind of data and see how they can work together to give us a really strong picture of what's taking place. And I think the other aspect of it is the benefit for our partners. The linkage, ARC linkage grant, particularly difficult grant. We have, as you can see, 18 partners. What excites me about that, despite the difficulty, is the potential impact our research can have for communities at the grassroots all the way up to the state level. And that's why our partnership, our Aboriginal colleague has helped us understand some of his Aboriginal research methodology that he says is important for us with our Aboriginal community we want to work with. But actually, I see it in all of our relationships. He calls it the three R's.
Yeah.
Control relationships. And I think we are keen that actually undergirds all of our research, not just the Aboriginal aspect of it. And I think that partnership and the potential that our research doesn't stay in the academic sphere somewhere, but actually can get translated in ways that are potential for the greatest social impact. And I think that's just a tremendous opportunity. We're still at the very early stages. We're just hopefully getting all our agreements signed off in the next couple of weeks, but looking forward to that.
Thank you. Yeah, Footy?
A question from Sarah Burchett. She wants to ask about the reporting frequency. Will there be updates, etc., during the 4-year project, or will we have to wait until the end of the project?
Oh, no, yeah. So how we're going to keep people up to date?
Yeah, we will be setting up a website that we can showcase the resources, the information, and we'll have different opportunities to share the results along the way. And the great thing about Andrew's side of it is that some of that we can get earlier than all the qualitative, and we certainly want to find ways to produce and make it. For those who are particularly interested, please contact our team members. My contact and Andrew's are there. Like more information more regularly, but we will be able to.
Yeah, and so I would envisage that as we, do chunks of the data side of things, that we would write up some nice, digestible, plain English stuff and put it on the website, for example. So thanks for the question, Sarah. Yes, hi.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Sarah. So my question, I think without this I can go well. So my question is about the definition of migrants and refugees you were using for your project. And also, is there any certain criteria which are, when you were, making them separate, or like you also were mentioning about a database, if I'm not mistaken. So how are you determining who are the refugees or who are the migrants, and any specific criteria?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks. I suppose it's reasonably fluid because from my perspective, you might have a completely different perspective. But so in one sense, you know, when say we're looking at the depleter data, we might look at all overseas born people in a community who may have arrived in the last 5 years, say. Some people might call them migrants, but some of them might consider themselves as residents and not call themselves migrants. So we want to kind of take that approach, I think. But with the data sets, you sort of work at what you're given, right? So how Home Affairs defines a migrant could be different to ABS within certain data sets. So it will no doubt end up being a bit fluid, but I think we always want to focus on the lived experience side of things, and that's what we'll be doing with the survey, is to give respondents the opportunity to tell us, do you belong here? What would you? That might be the good question we've been thinking about. How would you describe yourself now? Now you've lived here. You told us you've lived here for 3 years. That would be an interesting question, actually. Thank you. You've solved our problem with the survey. Yeah.
We're interested.
Thanks for that. I would love to follow your research. It's very interesting. My name's Deb Carr. I'm an international skills recognition expert, as well as I'm doing my PhD on the experiences of recognition of prior learning, migrants and displaced people and refugees being a component of that population. I'm really interested to know, are you considering two things? The dominant industry, because that will impact, like you've chosen different towns, what is the dominant industry in those towns? And that will impact a sense of belonging and also professional identity. So with my research, the impact of going through a process called recognition of prior learning, other than getting the certificate, there is social outcomes as well, social inclusivity, but there's also professional identity in terms of mental well-being, particularly for migrants because they're usually downgraded. So are you considering those aspects in looking at your different populations?
That will come up, I'm sure, because the migrant, we know that it's complex stories about belonging, and some of it has to do with the experience of translating their professional background and their qualifications into an Australian context. We haven't kind of specifically kind of identified that. So thank you for that. I'm sure that will be something. In terms of the dominant industry, again, we hadn't thought of it in terms of very specifically looking at the dominant industry, but I think that's something, a good takeaway for us to, you know, where do we start with the employer business side of where migrants are situated and the relationship they have with dominant employers. But I think certainly in the smaller towns that becomes clearer because it's either agriculture, generally aged care or mining, or in the midworks, which is a kind of a large employer. And they have the kind of, like the example I had given, they're the major employer in their community. So, but in thinking of it in terms of the dominant employer is really something for us to take away.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely create an employment baseline report before we start going into communities, I think. Employment and occupations and source countries and, you know, age structures and that sort of thing. Yeah, education. And yeah, if we end up doing a report on each town or community, that would be in there, I think.
Yes, so there'll be certainly a profile
context.
of Darwin that we can see across the businesses potentially. But then hopefully beyond that, I mean, business and employers is key, but they're also, where else are migrants engaging in community? Civic participation, sports, education, and other areas as well.
Okay, I think that'll have to be the last of the questions. Thank you so much. We do really appreciate you coming along. It's great to have David here. Thank you. And to our project colleagues, great to see you. Thanks online, and thank you for attending, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.